Viewer discretion is advised. This presentation details a real-life mystery involving missing persons and the presumption of death. The content is intended for a mature audience. A table set for a meal. A laptop computer, open and still running. The morning's newspaper, folded neatly on a bench. On the deck, fishing lines were cast, trailing in the water. The sails were furled, but deep in the hull, the engine was idling, gently pushing the vessel through the calm, turquoise water. It was a picture of perfect, peaceful life at sea. But it was a lie. Because the one thing missing from this 9.8-meter catamaran were the three men who were supposed to be on board. They had vanished. Not a single sign of struggle. No blood. No damage to the boat. The life jackets were all accounted for, still tucked away in their storage compartments. The emergency radio hadn't been touched. The emergency position indicating beacon, a device that would have screamed their location to every rescue service in the hemisphere, sat silent. It was as if three human beings had simply ceased to exist, plucked from the deck by an invisible hand, leaving behind only the chilling ghost of their last moments. The most haunting clue was a home video camera. The footage shows one of the men reeling in a fish, smiling, the picture of a perfect day. Then, the camera is set down on a table, still recording. The lens captures nothing but the empty deck and the blue sky. And then, moments later, it stops. That is the last known record of these men being alive. What happened in the moments after that camera was turned off? What could possibly make three experienced sailors disappear from a perfectly sound vessel, in calm seas, without a single cry for help? This is the story of the Kaz II, Australia's ghost yacht, and a mystery that continues to defy explanation. To understand the impossible, we have to go back to the beginning, to a dream shared between neighbors. In the suburbs of Perth, Western Australia, one of the most isolated major cities on Earth, lived Des Batten, a 56-year-old with a lifetime of experience on the water. His friends called him Des. He was the kind of man you trust with your life at sea, competent, meticulous, and a passionate sailor. His dream, as he entered the later stages of his life, was to buy a yacht and sail it all the way around the top half of Australia, a journey of thousands of miles through some of the world's most beautiful and treacherous waters. Living next door to Des were two brothers, Peter and James Tunstead, aged 69 and 63. They weren't sailors, not like Des. They were handy, practical men who had spent their lives working with their hands, but the open ocean was a new frontier. When Des shared his dream of the epic voyage, Peter and James were captivated. The idea of adventure, of leaving the mundane world behind for the azure expanse of the Coral Sea and the Indian Ocean, was intoxicating. It was the ultimate retirement plan. The three men pooled their resources, and in 2007, the dream took physical form. They purchased a beautiful, nearly new catamaran named the Kaz II. This wasn't some old, rickety vessel. It was a modern, well-equipped boat, designed for stability and long-haul cruising. Catamarans, with their twin hulls, are famously stable platforms, far less prone to capsizing than traditional single-hulled boats. The Kaz II had modern navigation equipment, a reliable engine, and all the safety gear required by law. It was, by all accounts, the perfect vessel for their grand adventure. They spent weeks preparing, stocking the galley with food, poring over nautical charts, and planning their route. The first leg was ambitious. From Airlie Beach in Queensland on Australia's northeast coast, they would sail north, navigating the labyrinthine wonders of the Great Barrier Reef, before rounding the continent's northern tip and heading west, back home to Perth. It was a voyage that would take months, a true test of endurance and friendship. On Sunday, April 15, 2007, the journey began. The Kaz II slipped out of its mooring at Airlie Beach, a bustling tourist town known as the gateway to the Whitsunday Islands. Des Batten was at the helm, the seasoned skipper finally living his dream. Peter and James Tunstead were his eager crew, ready to learn the ropes. Their families waved them off from the dock. There was no sense of foreboding, only excitement and the promise of the open water. That evening, Des made a satellite phone call to his wife. He was in high spirits. The boat was handling beautifully, the weather was clear, and the first day had gone off without a hitch. He told her their plan was to sail through the night, a common practice for long-distance sailors, to make good time on their journey north. The following day, Monday, April 16th, Peter Tunstead also spoke to his wife. He confirmed everything was going smoothly. They were enjoying the trip, the camaraderie was strong, and the vast blue wilderness of the Coral Sea was everything they had hoped it would be. That phone call was the last time any of their families would ever hear their voices. For the next 2 days, there was only silence. But this wasn't unusual. Out on the open ocean, cell service is non-existent, and making satellite calls is expensive. The families weren't worried. They assumed the men were simply focused on sailing, lost in the rhythm of the sea, sun, and stars. They were navigating one of the planet's great natural wonders, a maze of coral reefs that has been a graveyard for ships for centuries. But the Kaz II was equipped with GPS. Des was a careful navigator. The weather reports for the area showed nothing alarming, just typical tropical conditions with moderate winds and seas. There were no cyclones, no sudden squalls, no rogue waves reported in the region. By all accounts, it should have been smooth sailing. But somewhere in that 2-day silence, something went catastrophically wrong. And it happened so quickly, so silently, that they never even had a chance to press a single button on their emergency radio. On the morning of Wednesday, April 18th, a helicopter pilot flying a coastal patrol route spotted something unusual. It was a catamaran, drifting aimlessly about 88 nautical miles off the coast of Townsville. Its sails were up but were badly shredded, flapping uselessly in the wind. The pilot circled, trying to raise the vessel on the radio. There was no response. He flew lower, scanning the deck for any sign of life. He saw none. The boat appeared to be abandoned, a ghost ship adrift in the middle of the ocean. The pilot radioed in the coordinates to maritime authorities, reporting a vessel in distress, apparently deserted. A sense of unease settled over the search and rescue teams. A drifting, silent boat is one of the most ominous sights a mariner can encounter. It's a floating question mark, an unnatural void where life should be. Rescue boats were dispatched, but the Kaz II was far from shore. It would be another 2 days before anyone could physically board the mysterious yacht. For 48 agonizing hours, the Kaz II drifted alone, carrying its silent, chilling secret, while the world remained oblivious to the fact that 3 men had just vanished from the face of the earth. On the morning of April 18, 2007, a police officer from the Queensland Emergency Management helicopter was lowered onto the deck of the Kaz II. As his boots touched the fiberglass, he stepped into a scene frozen in time. The world of the 3 men aboard had stopped, but everything else had kept going. The engine was running its low, steady hum, a bizarre pulse for a ship with no heart. The sails were up, catching the wind, though one was badly shredded, its white fabric ripped and lashing in the breeze. On the deck, fishing lines were cast over the side, trailing in the turquoise water. Everything looked normal. Almost. It was a postcard from a perfect day at sea, except the people were missing from the picture. As the officer made his way into the cabin, the sense of eerie normalcy intensified. It was like walking into a home whose owners had just stepped out for a moment. A laptop computer was open on a table, powered on, its screen glowing. Spread out nearby were newspapers and a coffee mug. In the galley, the small kitchen area, a meal was seemingly in the process of being prepared, the table set for lunch. Down below, the sleeping quarters were tidy. Beds were made, clothes were folded, and personal belongings, wallets, cell phones, reading glasses, were left exactly where you'd expect to find them. There was no sign of a struggle, no hint of foul play, no blood, no overturned furniture. The boat's emergency systems were all in perfect working order. The radio was functional. The GPS was plotting their course. A full rack of life jackets was still in its designated storage spot, untouched. Even the emergency dinghy, the small inflatable raft used to abandon ship, was still hoisted in its proper place. The boat wasn't in distress. It hadn't been robbed. It hadn't lost power or steering. It was sailing itself, a perfectly functional vessel continuing its journey without a crew. The officer's initial report back to the mainland must have sounded like something from a work of fiction. He had a boat, but he had no people. It raised an immediate, chilling question. If nothing was wrong with the boat, what happened to the men? This wasn't a simple case of a sinking or a mechanical failure. This was something else entirely. It was as if Des Batten, Peter Tunstead, and James Tunstead had been going about their day, and in the span of a single heartbeat, were simply erased from existence. The authorities made the decision to tow the Kaz II back to the port of Townsville. That journey back to shore must have been a somber one. The sleek, modern catamaran, which had set off just days earlier as a symbol of freedom and lifelong dreams, was now a piece of floating evidence. A maritime crime scene with no victims, no weapons, and no witnesses. As it was guided into the harbor, news crews gathered, their cameras capturing the image that would soon be broadcast around the world. The ghost yacht, arriving back in civilization, its secret still locked away somewhere in the vast, indifferent expanse of the Coral Sea. For the families back home, the nightmare was just beginning. They had been living in a state of anxious quiet. It wasn't entirely unusual to go a day or two without contact when the men were at sea and out of cell range. But as the hours stretched into days, a knot of worry began to tighten. Then the call came. Not from Des or Peter or James, but from the police. The conversation is one that no family ever wants to have. Your loved one's boat has been found. It's safe, but they are not on it. Imagine the disbelief, the sheer impossibility of that statement. How can the boat be fine but the people are gone? The family's minds would have raced through every logical explanation. Did they stop to swim and get caught in a current? Did one fall in and the others went in after him? But these men were experienced. Des Batten was a seasoned sailor. They knew the ocean. They knew the rules. They knew the dangers. They wouldn't have all taken such a risk at the same time. The last time anyone had spoken to them was on the morning of Sunday, April 15th. Des had a cheerful phone call with his wife, telling her they were sailing in beautiful, calm weather, planning to dock at Townsville in a couple of days. Everything was perfect. Now, 3 days later, that perfection had curdled into an incomprehensible tragedy. With the Kaz II secured in port, one of the largest maritime search and rescue operations in Australian history was launched. The search area was immense, over 300 square nautical miles of open ocean. Military aircraft, including Royal Australian Air Force planes equipped with sophisticated infrared sensors, began to scour the sea from above. Coast Guard vessels and volunteer marine rescue boats crisscrossed the waves below. The search was a desperate race against time. But it was a race that had started with a devastating 3-day delay. If the men had gone overboard on Sunday, their chances of survival in the warm but treacherous waters of the Coral Sea were dwindling with every passing minute. The searchers were looking for anything. A life raft, a piece of debris, a signal mirror. But most of all, they were looking for 3 men. They scanned the endless blue, knowing that in this vast wilderness of water, a human being is a tiny, insignificant speck. Day after day, the planes flew their grid patterns and the boats churned the sea. Day after day they found nothing. The Coral Sea, which had been the backdrop to the men's dream voyage, had swallowed them whole, leaving not a single trace behind. The hope that had flickered in the hearts of their families began to dim, replaced by a cold, dreadful certainty. Back in Townsville, forensic investigators began their own meticulous search, not of the sea, but of the boat itself. They treated the Kaz II like a time capsule, a self-contained world where the last moments of 3 men's lives were preserved. They dusted for fingerprints, analyzed the GPS data, and examined every logbook and personal item. They were looking for the anomaly, the one detail that didn't fit, the single clue that could unlock the entire puzzle. They knew the answer had to be somewhere on this boat, and as they carefully documented every single object, tucked away in a storage compartment, they found something they hadn't expected. A home video camera. Inside was a tape. On it was the final, haunting footage of Des Batten, Peter Tunstead, and James Tunstead, recorded just hours before they vanished. It was a video that promised to show the world what had really happened on the Kaz II. A video that would either solve the entire mystery or plunge it into even deeper darkness. The digital file loads. The screen flickers to life. The first image is shaky, handheld. It's the bright, almost blinding glare of a tropical sun on a calm turquoise sea. The sound is of a gentle wind and the rhythmic slap of small waves against a fiberglass hull. Then a voice. Young, cheerful, full of life. It's James Tunstead. "All right, testing, he says, his voice tinged with a classic Aussie accent. The camera pans, a little unsteadily, across the deck of the Kaz II. And there they are. The 3 men alive. Des Batten, the skipper, is at the helm. He's 69 years old, but he looks solid, capable. He's wearing a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, a slight smile on his face as he looks out over the endless blue. He gives a little wave to the camera, a casual gesture that speaks of a man completely at home on the water. This is his element. He's in control. The camera then finds Peter Tunstead, James's 56-year-old brother. He's at the back of the boat, holding a fishing rod. He's focused, leaning over the stern, his line trailing in the yacht's wake. The scene is utterly, disarmingly normal. It's a picture of idyllic retirement. Three friends, brothers on the trip of a lifetime. The sun is shining. The sea is calm. There isn't a single cloud in the sky. This isn't the setting for a horror story. It's a postcard. The timestamp on the video reads 10:05 a.m., Sunday, April 15, 2007. This single piece of information is electrifying for investigators. It confirms the men were alive and well more than 24 hours after their last radio contact. It places them exactly where they should be, sailing north along the Queensland coast. The video continues. James, the man behind the camera, provides a running commentary. He pans across the horizon, showing the distant, hazy coastline. He zooms in on a seabird. He films his brother Peter struggling with his fishing line. "Got a big one, Pete?" James asks, a laugh in his voice. Peter grunts in response, reeling furiously. "Nah, snagged on something," he says, his voice tight with frustration. "Think it's the bottom." Des from the helm calls back without turning around. "Can't be, mate. We're in 60 feet of water here." This is the central drama of the home video. A snagged fishing lure. Peter jiggles the rod, trying to free the line. He mutters under his breath. James keeps filming, zooming in on his brother's hands, on the taut fishing line disappearing into the impossibly blue water. For a few minutes, this is all that happens. The gentle hum of the engine, the wind, and Peter's quiet struggle with a $10 lure. So mundane, so trivial. And that's what makes it terrifying. Because we know what's coming. We know that within hours, these three men will be gone. The camera captures the details investigators were desperate for. It shows the weather conditions were perfect. The sea state was calm, with only a light swell. This footage single-handedly sinks the theory of a freak wave or a sudden squall capsizing the boat. There was no storm. The Kaz II wasn't battling the elements. It was gliding through paradise. The video also shows the men's demeanor. They are relaxed, happy. There is no sign of tension, no arguments, no distress. They're joking with each other. The theory of a fight, of a mutiny or foul play among the crew, suddenly seems incredibly unlikely. These men look like they're having the time of their lives. Then, Peter finally gives up on his snagged line. He sets the rod down in its holder, the line still taut. "I'll deal with it later," he says to the camera. James pans back to Des, who is still steering the boat, a picture of calm confidence. The last clear shot of Des Batten shows him looking ahead, navigating his pride and joy through a perfect day. And then, the final seconds of the footage. James turns the camera on himself. We see his face for the first time. He's smiling, squinting in the bright sun. He looks young, happy, and completely carefree. He gives a thumbs up. "Good day for it," he says. Then he reaches for the camera. The image becomes a jumble of the deck, a flash of blue sky, and then the camera is placed on the dashboard near the helm. It continues to record, but now the shot is static. It's pointed out across the bow of the boat, showing the empty sea ahead. For a few moments, you can hear the men's voices in the background, indistinctly. They're just chatting. The sound of the engine is a steady drone. The boat rocks gently. Nothing happens. Absolutely nothing. It's a video of an empty ocean. And then, after 37 seconds of this static shot, the recording stops. The screen goes black. That's it. That's the entire video. The last known record of Des Batten, Peter Tunstead, and James Tunstead. It ends not with a bang, not with a scream, but with the quiet, mundane click of a camera being turned off at 10:35 a.m. For the police, this video was both a goldmine and a source of profound frustration. It answered so many questions. The weather was good. The men were in good spirits. The boat was functioning perfectly. But the one question it couldn't answer was the most important one. What happened next? The video proved they were alive at 10:35 a.m. on Sunday. The helicopter crew spotted the Kaz II adrift at 3:45 p.m. on Wednesday. This gave investigators a precise window of time, about 77 hours, in which three experienced men vanished from a perfectly sound yacht in calm seas. But the video offered no clues as to the cause. There was no other boat on the horizon, no sign of a collision, no mayday call. The snagged fishing lure became a focal point. Could this trivial event have somehow triggered a chain reaction of disaster? The police started to build a theory, a sequence of events, based on this tiny detail. It was a theory born not from evidence, but from a desperate need to explain the unexplainable. A theory that tried to connect a snagged lure to 3 missing men. Imagine the scene. It's just after 10:35 a.m. The camera is off. Peter is still annoyed about his favorite lure, stuck on something deep below. Maybe he decides he has to get it back. He's at the stern of the boat, a dangerous place even in calm seas. The boat is still moving, propelled by the engine. Perhaps he leans too far. Or maybe he tries to get a better angle, climbing onto the small swimming platform at the back of the yacht. One slip, a single moment of lost balance, and he's in the water. He falls overboard. His brother James sees it happen. Without thinking, he dives in to save him. It's a natural, heroic instinct. But now there are 2 men in the water. Des Batten, the experienced skipper, is at the helm. He hears the shouts. He sees his 2 friends struggling in the wake of his own boat. He cuts the engine, but the yacht, with its momentum, continues to drift away from them. He's alone on the boat. His friends are in the water. Panic sets in. What does he do? He has to get to them. He scrambles to the side, maybe to throw them a line, maybe to deploy the life raft. And in that moment of frantic haste, he too slips. He falls. And just like that, in the space of less than a minute, all 3 men are in the water. Their yacht, the Kaz II, with its engine now off but its sails still up, catching the gentle breeze, begins to slowly, silently drift away. It's a perfect machine doing exactly what it was designed to do. Only now it has no crew. It drifts away from them faster than they can swim. They watch their only hope, their home, their salvation, become a smaller and smaller speck on the horizon. This was the official theory. A tragic, almost unbelievable sequence of common mistakes and bad luck. 1 man falls, the others try to help, and they all end up stranded in the vast, empty ocean. Seemed plausible. It explained how 3 men could disappear without a trace from a perfectly fine boat. But it was just a theory. A story created to fill a terrifying void. And as investigators looked closer at the physical state of the yacht itself, at the clues left behind on the deck and in the cabin, they began to realize that this simple, tragic story might not fit the facts at all. The boat had its own story to tell, and it was a story that was far stranger than a simple accident. The first boarding party, a mix of marine rescue volunteers and police, stepped from their vessel onto the deck of the Kaz II, and the first thing that struck them was the quiet. Not the quiet of an empty boat, but the quiet of a boat that shouldn't be empty. It was an expectant silence, as if the crew had just stepped away for a moment and would be back any second. The engine was idling, a low rhythmic thrum in the background. One of the large white sails, the head sail, was unfurled and luffing gently in the breeze, while the mainsail was neatly bundled and covered on the boom. It was a strange combination. Why have the engine on and a sail out at the same time? They moved cautiously, their boots thudding on the fiberglass deck. On a small table in the cockpit, a half-full mug of coffee sat, cold to the touch. Beside it, a newspaper was laid out, its pages slightly damp from the sea spray, but still readable. It was as if someone had been sitting right there, enjoying a morning read, and had simply vanished into thin air. Down below in the cabin, the scene was even more surreal. It was tidy, impeccably so. 3 beds were made, the blankets pulled taut. Clothes were folded and stowed away. In the small galley kitchen, dishes were washed and put away in their racks. On the cabin's main table, a laptop computer was open, turned on, and still running. The screen glowed, waiting for a command that would never come. It felt less like a vessel adrift and more like a floating time capsule. A moment of peaceful domestic life frozen forever. There were no signs of a struggle. No overturned furniture. No smashed instruments, no blood. There were no signs of a robbery. Wallets, cash, and cell phones were all sitting right where you'd expect them to be. There were no signs of a sudden emergency either. The boat's emergency beacon, its APERB, was still in its bracket, unactivated. The radio was in perfect working order. 3 life jackets were found, stowed neatly away. If something had gone wrong, if someone had fallen overboard, why hadn't anyone grabbed a life jacket? Why hadn't anyone made a distress call? Back on deck, the investigators noticed more details that just didn't add up. A single fishing line was cast over the side of the boat, its lure trailing in the water. Just 1, not 3. This suggested that at the moment of whatever happened, only one of the men was actively fishing. So what were the other two doing? Then they saw something that, to any experienced sailor, would be a blaring alarm bell. Dangling over the side of the hull were the boat's fenders, those cushioned bumpers you use to protect a boat from scraping against a dock or another vessel. You only put fenders out when you're about to come alongside something. You never leave them out in the open ocean. It's sailing 101. It creates drag, it's unnecessary, and it's just not done. So why were the fenders out on the Kaz II, in the middle of the Coral Sea? Were they planning to dock somewhere they shouldn't have been? Or more chillingly, were they preparing to meet another boat? Out there in the vast, empty expanse of the ocean, the initial, simple theory of a freak accident was beginning to crumble under the weight of these contradictions. A rogue wave or a sudden storm would have left a scene of chaos, not calm. A simple slip overboard might explain one man missing, but not three, and certainly not without a single distress call or a single life jacket being used. The evidence on the boat wasn't telling a story of panic. It was telling a story of interruption. A sudden, bizarre, and total stop to a perfectly normal day. The investigators knew the boat itself held the key. They began to pull the digital breadcrumbs from its systems. The most important of these was the GPS. A boat's GPS doesn't just show you where you are. It logs where you've been, creating a digital map of your entire journey, second by second. When they downloaded the data from the Kaz II, they finally had a timeline. And what it showed was deeply unsettling. The log showed the Kaz II leaving Airlie Beach on Sunday, April 15th, just as planned. It tracked their journey north, a steady, unremarkable path up the coast. The boat's speed and heading were consistent. Everything was normal, until it wasn't. At 10:05 a.m. on Sunday morning, the GPS showed the boat suddenly changing course. It began to drift. The data indicated that from that point forward, the Kaz II was no longer under human control. It was being pushed by the wind and the current, a ghost ship on a phantom voyage. The investigators now had a time frame. Whatever happened to Des Batten, Peter Tunstead, and James Tunstead, it happened on Sunday morning, shortly before 10:05 a.m. They had been at sea for less than 24 hours. This was a major breakthrough, but it only deepened the mystery. What could possibly have happened in those few minutes? The police and maritime experts were stumped. The tidy cabin, the running engine, the deployed fenders, the unused safety gear. None of it fit together. They needed something more. They needed to see what the men saw. They needed a witness. And then they found one. Tucked away in the cabin, among the men's personal belongings, was a digital video camera. The investigators' hearts must have pounded. This was it. The best possible piece of evidence they could have hoped for. With painstaking care, they took the camera back to the lab. They charged the battery, inserted the memory card, and pressed play. They were about to see the last recorded moments of the crew of the Kaz II. The footage begins on Saturday, April 14th, the day before they vanished. The screen flickers to life, showing the smiling, sun-drenched face of Des Batten, the skipper. He's at the helm, steering the boat out of the harbor. The sky is blue, the water is calm. He pans the camera around, showing his friend Peter Tunstead, who gives a cheerful wave. The mood is light, happy, full of the excitement that comes with the start of a grand adventure. The footage continues, compiled from several short clips. We see them motoring along the coast. We see James Tunstead reeling in a fish, a proud grin on his face. We see Peter at the back of the boat, setting up his fishing lines. The sea is calm, almost like glass. There are no signs of bad weather, no hint of danger. It's just three friends enjoying their retirement, living their dream. Then the final clip begins. The timestamp shows it was recorded at 10 a.m. on Sunday, April 15th. Just 5 minutes before the GPS shows the boat starting to drift. The camera is held by James. He's filming his brother Peter at the stern. Peter is reeling in a line. Behind him, the water is a placid deep blue. There are no other boats in sight. Nothing but ocean. Des Batten can be seen for a moment steering the boat. Everything looks completely, utterly normal. Peter smiles at the camera. The shot is steady. The boat is barely rocking. And then the recording stops. That's it. That's the last anyone ever saw of them. 5 minutes later, the Kaz II was adrift. The men were gone. The footage provided no answers. It only provided a single terrifying question. What on earth happened in the 300 seconds after that camera was turned off? 300 seconds. It's the length of a pop song. the time it takes to make a cup of coffee, or in the case of the Kaz II, it was enough time for 3 men to vanish from the face of the earth, leaving behind a perfectly preserved mystery. The authorities, when they finally boarded the ghost yacht, were faced with this exact puzzle. They had the last known footage, a timestamp, and a boat full of clues that seemed to contradict each other at every turn. Their first job was to build a timeline, to take the chaos of the scene and force it into a logical sequence. What they came up with would become the official story, the one you read in the initial newspaper headlines. But as we'll see, the official story is often just the simplest one, not necessarily the truest one. The investigation culminated in a coronial inquest, which, for those unfamiliar, is a court-like proceeding held to determine the cause of a death in cases where the circumstances are unknown or suspicious. The coroner's job isn't to assign blame, but simply to establish the facts. Who died and how, when, and where they died. In this case, there were no bodies. But after a certain amount of time, the missing can be declared deceased, and that's what happened here. The inquest, led by Queensland State Coroner Michael Barnes, became the official attempt to solve the unsolvable. After hearing testimony from maritime experts, meteorologists, friends, and family, and after poring over every piece of forensic evidence from the Kaz II, the coroner landed on a theory. It was a theory of a single tragic mistake. A cascade of errors, one domino falling after another, leading to an unthinkable outcome. It's often referred to as the freak accident theory, and it goes something like this. The men are enjoying their day. The weather, while not perfect, is manageable. The sea has a swell of about 1.5 meters, that's around 5 feet, choppy, but nothing an experienced skipper like Des Batten couldn't handle. They're trolling for fish lines in the water as we saw in that final video. Then something goes wrong. Maybe it's a fishing lure. One of the lines trailing behind the boat gets snagged. It could be on a piece of debris, or worse, it could have gotten tangled in the boat's own propeller or rudder. This is a common, if annoying, problem for fishermen. According to the coroner's theory, one of the brothers, likely the younger and more agile James, decides to sort it out. He's 56 but still fit. He might have tried to free the line from the deck, leaning over the side. But with the boat rocking in the swell, he loses his footing. He slips. In an instant, he's in the water. Now the boat is still moving forward, even at a slow troll. James is immediately being left behind. His brother Des sees it happen. He's 69 years old. He doesn't think. He doesn't grab a life jacket or a flotation device. He just reacts. His younger brother is in the water, in trouble. In a moment of pure, instinctual panic, Des jumps in after him. At the helm, Derek sees the unfolding chaos. 2 of his best friends, 2 brothers, are now in the choppy coral sea, and the boat is pulling away from them. He has to act fast. He spins the wheel, trying to turn the boat around. He likely cuts the engine to idle and puts it in neutral, so he doesn't risk hitting them with the propeller as he approaches. He might have yelled, thrown a life ring. But the current is strong, the men are drifting, and panic is a powerful blinding force. Seeing his friends struggling, perhaps being separated by the waves, Derek makes a final, fatal decision. He's the captain. He's responsible. He believes he's the only one who can save them, so he too goes into the water to help. In this single terrifying chain of events, all 3 men are now in the ocean. They are without life jackets. The Kaz II, its engine still humming quietly in neutral, begins to drift away, carried by the wind and the current. It is faster than a man can swim. They watch their only hope, their sanctuary, slip away over the horizon. The entire sequence, from the first slip to the 3rd man in the water, could have easily taken place in under 5 minutes. This theory on the surface seems to explain a lot. It explains why the engine was running but the boat was in neutral. It explains why the sails were up. They were motor sailing to save fuel. It explains why the fishing lines were out. It explains the general state of the cabin. A normal day, suddenly and violently interrupted. A laptop open, a newspaper on the table. No signs of a struggle, because the struggle didn't happen on the boat. It happened in the water. The coroner even pointed to a specific piece of evidence. A small white fishing lure was found snagged on the boat, near the stern, its line trailing in the water. This, he argued, was the catalyst. The single tiny object that started the whole deadly domino effect. It's neat. It's tidy. It's a tragedy born of bad luck, and a series of very human errors. Experienced sailors know you never, Ever jump in after someone without being tethered to the boat or having a flotation device? But in a moment of panic, seeing a loved one in distress, training can go right out the window. The coroner concluded that the men had fallen overboard and either drowned or were taken by sharks, their bodies lost to the immense and unforgiving ocean. He officially closed the case. A heartbreaking accident. End of story. Except it wasn't. For many, including the families of the men, this explanation felt hollow, felt too convenient. It papered over too many strange details, too many nagging questions that just wouldn't go away. First, the neatness. Yes, the theory accounts for a sudden departure, but would it really be that tidy? 3 men in a life-or-death panic. Wouldn't something be knocked over? A chair, a cup, anything? The fenders were still hanging over the side of the boat, something a skipper would almost certainly have brought in once they were well out to sea. It suggests they were either forgotten, or perhaps they never intended to be out for very long. Then there's the life jackets. They were stored properly in a cupboard, easily accessible. These were not novices. Des Batten had been sailing for over 25 years. They all knew the risks of the ocean. The idea that not one, but all 3 of them would abandon this fundamental rule of safety seemed improbable. Why wouldn't Derek, the skipper at the very least, have thrown all the available flotation devices overboard before going in himself? He would have known that was their only real chance. And what about the weather? The official report called the seas choppy, but other boaters in the area that day described the conditions as lumpy and bumpy, but not dangerous. A 5-foot swell is uncomfortable, but for a 32-foot catamaran, it's not a catastrophic, man-overboard-inducing event. Could a single wave have been responsible? Perhaps. A rogue wave isn't impossible, but it adds another layer of extreme unlikelihood to an already unlikely story. The biggest hole in the theory, however, is the sheer improbability of the cascade itself. It requires 3 experienced men to make 3 catastrophic errors, one after another in a matter of minutes. James falls in. Mistake 1. Des jumps in after him without a life jacket. Mistake 2. Derek, the captain, leaves the vessel completely, also without a life jacket. Mistake 3. It's a chain reaction of perfect failure. It's possible, of course. Tragedies are often built on a foundation of what-ifs and simple mistakes. But here it felt like too much. It felt like a story created to fit the evidence, rather than a conclusion that flowed naturally from it. The coroner's ruling provided an official answer, but it didn't provide closure. Because as investigators, both amateur and professional, dug deeper, they found other details, other possibilities that the inquest had seemingly overlooked or dismissed. They began to question the very foundation of the freak accident theory. They looked at the currents, at the boat's last known position, and at the strange digital footprints left behind. And they started to wonder if the men hadn't fallen from the boat at all. They started to wonder if perhaps something had been waiting for them. Because the neat and tidy explanation of a fishing accident ignored one crucial, terrifying possibility, that the 3 men from the Kaz II didn't get off the boat by accident. They got off on purpose. To willingly step off a perfectly good boat into the vast, unforgiving ocean is, for most people, unthinkable. It's an act of desperation, a last resort. But to do it when your boat is fine, when the weather is calm, when you have food, water, and fuel, that isn't an act of desperation. That's an act of intention. It's a plan. And if Des Batten, Peter Tunstead, and James Tunstead had a plan, it changes this entire story. It transforms it from a tragic accident into a deep and deliberate mystery. Let's entertain this idea for a moment. Let's assume they weren't swept away. Let's assume they climbed off the Kaz II, one by one, and onto another vessel. This theory, the secret rendezvous theory, opens a Pandora's box of possibilities, some of them incredibly dark. The Coral Sea, beautiful as it is, has a reputation. It's a massive, sparsely patrolled expanse of water that forms a highway between Australia and the islands of the Pacific. A highway perfect for those who don't want to be seen. Could the Kaz II have been a transport vessel for something illegal? It's a question investigators had to ask. A brand new 100-foot catamaran doesn't raise many eyebrows. It looks like what it is, a rich man's toy. It's the perfect cover. 3 ordinary-looking guys on a fishing trip. Who would suspect a thing? The rendezvous point could have been set for that Sunday, April 15th. They sail to the coordinates, another boat pulls alongside. A transfer is made, drugs, weapons, people, you name it, and the three men are paid handsomely for their trouble. But this is where the theory starts to fray. If this was a smuggling run, it was a catastrophically bad one. The number one rule of any covert operation is to not draw attention to yourself. Leaving a multi-$100,000 ghost yacht to drift into the Great Barrier Reef, one of the most popular and monitored tourist destinations on the planet, is the equivalent of setting off fireworks and a screaming alarm. It guarantees an investigation. It guarantees headlines. If they were involved in something illicit, they would have scuttled the boat, sunk it, sent it to the bottom where it would tell no tales. They wouldn't just leave it running, with the engine on and a laptop open like a floating Marie Celeste. The ghost ship itself is the biggest piece of evidence against a clean, successful criminal transaction. So what if the transaction wasn't clean? What if the rendezvous went wrong? Perhaps the other party decided they didn't want any witnesses. In this scenario, the men aren't willing participants in their departure. They're victims. They're forced off the Kaz II and onto the other boat, taken to be silenced permanently. The perpetrators, not wanting to be caught on a stolen yacht, simply leave the Kaz II to drift, assuming the currents will take it far out to sea where it will never be found. They just didn't count on the tide and the wind pushing it west back towards civilization. This version paints a much more sinister picture. It suggests our three men weren't criminals but simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, or perhaps they made a deal with the wrong people and paid the ultimate price. But there's another, even more personal possibility that doesn't involve cartels or criminals. What if the rendezvous wasn't for a package but for people? What if the three men on the Kaz II intended to disappear? A planned disappearance is the stuff of novels and movies, but it happens. People overwhelmed by debt, by legal trouble, by a life they can no longer stand, they simply walk away. They create a new identity and start over somewhere else. To pull it off requires immense planning, secrecy, and usually a little bit of help. A boat like the Kaz II is the perfect vehicle for the first leg of that journey. You sail out beyond the reach of cell towers, beyond the prying eyes on shore. You meet a confederate on another vessel, someone who can take you to a non-extradition country, a quiet island chain where you can melt away. You leave just enough ambiguity behind to make it look like an accident. A lost fishing lure, a tangled line. It's a way to let your family collect the life insurance, to give them closure without revealing the truth. The police, of course, looked into this. They dug into the lives of Des, Peter, and James. Was there a secret financial crisis brewing? A hidden scandal? Were their lives falling apart behind the scenes? By all public accounts, the answer was no. Des Batten was a successful businessman who had just bought his dream boat. Peter and James Tunstead were brothers who were by all accounts content, with families and stable lives. There were no red flags, no massive debts, no desperate cries for help. To believe they planned this is to believe that three separate men, with three separate lives and families, all conspired to abandon everything they'd ever known together at the exact same time. It's an extraordinary claim, and it requires extraordinary evidence, which simply doesn't exist. And yet, the idea lingers because it almost makes more sense than the alternative. Think about it. What is more likely? That three experienced boaters were all simultaneously knocked overboard by a freak wave on a calm day, without making a sound or grabbing a single life jacket, or that they were picked up by another boat. The sheer improbability of the accident scenario forces us to consider the intentional one. The family of the previous owners, the Pattons, who had sold the boat to Des Batten just a few months earlier, were heartbroken and baffled. They knew that boat inside and out. They described it as incredibly stable, safe, and forgiving. They couldn't fathom a scenario where someone could just accidentally fall off, let alone three people. Their sentiment was echoed by maritime experts across Australia. The design of the Kaz II, with its high guardrails and wide decks, made a simple slip and fall highly unlikely. This is the central conflict of the Kaz II mystery. The physical evidence on the boat points towards a mundane, if tragic, accident. But logic, common sense, and human nature scream that something is wrong with that picture. Feels too simple, too neat. It feels like a story that's missing its most important chapter. Maybe we're asking the wrong question. We've been asking how three men could have vanished from the boat. But what if they weren't the only ones on board? The official investigation concluded there was no evidence of any other person being on the Kaz II. But no evidence isn't the same as proof of absence. In the vastness of the ocean, evidence has a way of washing away. Imagine a fourth person, an uninvited guest. This person could have boarded the Kaz II at sea, a modern-day pirate. Or perhaps more chillingly, they could have been on board from the very beginning, a hidden passenger who came out of the shadows when they were far from shore. In this scenario, the tidy cabin isn't a sign of a peaceful morning. It's the sign of a crime scene where the victims had no chance to fight back. The men could have been forced overboard at gunpoint. Their bodies, weighed down, would never be found. The perpetrator then pilots the boat for a while before disembarking onto their own vessel, leaving the Kaz II to drift, a silent, empty testament to a perfect crime. This theory accounts for everything. It explains why all three men are gone. It explains the lack of a mayday call. It explains the lack of any sign of a struggle, because there was no struggle to be had. It was an ambush. But who would do this? And why? The boat wasn't stolen. Nothing of value was taken. It seems like a lot of risk for very little reward. Unless the motive wasn't robbery. Unless the motive was personal. Was one of these men the target, and the other two were simply collateral damage? It's a terrifying thought, that they sailed from Airlie Beach into a meticulously planned trap. All of these theories, a smuggling run gone wrong, a planned escape, a violent hijacking, they all rely on one key element. A second boat. An unknown vessel that appeared and disappeared, leaving no trace. In all the vastness of the Coral Sea, with all the fishing trawlers, cargo ships, and sailboats, not a single person reported seeing the Kaz II interacting with another boat. Not one. No strange radio chatter was overheard. No unusual sightings were logged. The second boat, the key to unlocking this entire mystery, is itself a ghost. And so we are driven back to the Kaz II itself, floating alone in the waves. We've been forced to imagine other vessels and secret plots because the official explanation seems so unlikely. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if the clues to what really happened aren't in some imaginary second boat, but we're on the Kaz II the whole time, hiding in plain sight? Because the story the authorities told the public, the story of a calm, orderly boat, wasn't the complete picture. There were things found on that yacht that didn't fit the narrative. Small details. Disturbing inconsistencies that hinted at a final few moments that were anything but peaceful. And one of those details was the video camera. The video camera, a Sony Handycam found sitting on the chart table, seemingly forgotten. To the investigators who climbed aboard the drifting Kaz II, it was a potential holy grail. A digital witness that could show them, frame by frame, exactly what had happened. They carefully removed the memory card, their minds racing with possibilities. Would it show a catastrophic wave? A sudden engine failure? A medical emergency? Would it capture the final, terrifying moments of Des Batten, Peter Tunstead, and Jim Tunstead? They plugged it in, the screen flickered to life, and they pressed play. What they saw was life. Normal, beautiful, unremarkable life. The footage begins on the morning of Sunday, April 15th. The man behind the camera is Des Batten. He's filming his friends. The sun is bright, casting a gentle glare on the water. The sea isn't a raging monster. It's a sheet of deep blue glass, calm and inviting. Des pans the camera across the deck. We see Peter Tunstead, 63 years old, standing at the stern. He's wearing a bright red shirt, shorts, and a grin. He's got a fishing line in the water, his focus entirely on the task at hand. He looks relaxed, content. This isn't a man worried about an impending storm. This is a man on the vacation of a lifetime. Then the camera swings around to the helm. There's 69-year-old Jim Tunstead, the skipper. He's steering the Kaz II, guiding her north. He looks over his shoulder, sees the camera, and gives a casual wave. He's at ease, in his element. The boat is moving at a steady clip, the engine humming in the background. Everything is exactly as it should be. The footage is mundane in the most heartbreaking way. It's the kind of home video anyone on a fishing trip would make. Look at the beautiful day. Look at my friend trying to catch a fish. Look at us sailing into the future. Des even turns the camera on himself for a moment, a quick selfie video. His face full of the simple joy of being at sea with his best mates. The investigators watched, holding their breath, waiting for the turn. For the moment the sky darkens, the waves pick up, the men's expressions change from joy to concern, then to fear. They watch the timestamp in the corner of the screen tick forward. 10 a.m., 10:01, 10:02. The calm continues. Des zooms in on Peter's fishing rod, then back out to the endless expanse of the Coral Sea. It's peaceful, serene. At 10:05 a.m., Des Batten apparently decides he's filmed enough. He walks back toward the cabin, the camera still recording, pointing down at his feet. He places the camera on the chart table, but he doesn't turn it off. The camera sits there, its lens now aimed sideways across the cabin, capturing a sliver of the deck. For a few moments nothing happens. Then a leg enters the frame. It's Peter Tunstead. He's moved from the stern and is now standing on the side of the boat, still focused on his fishing line. He's reeling it in. We can't see his face, just his leg and the side of the boat. And that's it. That's the last thing the camera ever recorded. A man's leg. A fishing rod. A calm sea. The footage doesn't end with a bang, or a scream, or a wave crashing over the deck. Just stops. The battery dies or the memory card fills up. The last recorded moment of human activity aboard the Kaz II is one of profound, haunting normalcy. This video, which was supposed to provide answers, only deepened the mystery. It established a concrete timeline. At 10:05 a.m. on Sunday, April 15th, at least two of the men, Des and Peter, were alive, well, and in good spirits. The weather was perfect. The boat was operating normally. So what happened between 10:05 a.m. and the next morning, when the boat was first spotted drifting? To answer that, investigators turned to the second digital witness, the GPS. A boat's GPS doesn't just show you where you are. It logs where you've been, creating a digital breadcrumb trail of your entire voyage. And the Kaz II's GPS told a story that was just as chilling as the video, but in a different way. The data showed the boat leaving Airlie Beach on April 15th, heading north. Its path was logical, professional. Skipper Jim Tunstead was clearly an experienced sailor. He kept the boat on a steady course, hugging the coastline, navigating from one waypoint to the next, just as planned. The boat's speed was consistent, its movements deliberate. The GPS log showed them passing George Point, then Gloucester Island. The digital track was a portrait of a perfectly normal journey. And then, at 10:56 a.m., less than an hour after Des Batten put down that video camera, the pattern breaks. The Kaz II's steady, northward track suddenly and inexplicably changes. The boat makes a sharp turn to the east, heading out into the open sea. Its speed becomes erratic. The purposeful, human-guided navigation is gone. From that point forward, the GPS track shows a vessel no longer under command. It's drifting, pushed by the wind, pulled by the current. A ghost ship, aimlessly wandering the coral sea. The timeline was now terrifyingly narrow. At 10:05 a.m., the men were fine. By 10:56 a.m., they were gone, and their boat was adrift. 51 minutes. In less than an hour, on a calm, sunny day, 3 experienced men vanished from a perfectly sound vessel without a trace. The freak wave theory, the idea that a sudden violent squall had washed them overboard, seemed like the only plausible explanation. It's what the coroner would eventually conclude. A tragic accident. An act of God. But there was a problem with that theory. A big one. Investigators pulled the official meteorological data for that specific area, the waters off Bowen, Australia, for the morning of Sunday, April 15th. They checked the reports from the Bureau of Meteorology. They looked at satellite imagery. They cross-referenced data from other boats that were in the area at the same time. And the data was unanimous. It was irrefutable. There was no storm. There was no freak wave. There was no sudden squall. The weather reports for that 51-minute window described conditions that were, in sailing terms, practically idyllic. The wind was light, blowing from the southeast at about 15 knots. The sea was calm, with a swell of less than a meter. Visibility was clear. It was, by all accounts, a perfect day for sailing. This is the contradiction that lies at the heart of the Kaz II mystery. The official explanation relies on a sudden, violent weather event. But the hard data, the meteorological records, the boat's own video camera, says that event never happened. The men weren't swept away by a raging storm. They disappeared in broad daylight, in calm seas and perfect weather. So you have to ask the question, if there was no storm, what could possibly have caused all 3 men to go into the water at the same time? An experienced skipper like Jim Tunstead would never abandon the helm in an emergency. Protocol, training, and common sense dictate that one person always stays with the boat. For all 3 to go overboard suggests an event that was so sudden, so unexpected, that it bypassed all their training and instincts. And that's when investigators started looking closer. Not at the big picture like the weather or the boat's course, but at the small things, the tiny details that didn't quite add up, the fenders that were still out, the arrangement of the fishing lines, the position of the sails. And when they looked again at that final haunting frame of video, the shot of Peter Tunstead's leg as he reeled in his line, they saw something they had initially overlooked. A small, seemingly insignificant object lying on the deck that might just be the key to the entire mystery. It was a small white plastic fishing lure, lying innocuously near the stern. It was the kind of thing you'd see on any fishing boat, a piece of clutter so common it was essentially invisible. Investigators had seen it a dozen times, dismissing it as just another piece of equipment. But now, looking at it through the lens of a potential crime scene, they saw it for what it was: an anomaly. It wasn't stowed away in the tackle box, which was found neatly closed. It wasn't on the end of a fishing rod. It was just there, on the deck, as if it had been dropped in a hurry. This single, overlooked object sparked a complete reevaluation of the entire event, leading to what is now the most widely accepted theory of what happened to the men of the Kaz II. It's a theory born not from a single cataclysmic event, but from a simple, mundane, and tragically common fishing problem. A chain reaction of events, where one small mishap cascaded into an irreversible disaster. Let's reconstruct that Sunday morning. The sun is out, the seas are calm but have a gentle swell. The three men are relaxed. Peter Tunstead decides to do a little fishing. We know this because his rod was out and his camera was rolling. He casts his line and we see him in that final video reeling it in. But according to this new theory, something goes wrong. His line with that white lure on the end gets snagged. It's caught on something on the seabed, maybe a rock or a piece of reef. It's a frustrating but routine problem. Peter tries to free it. He pulls, he jiggles the rod, but it's stuck fast. The camera has been put down by now, but the scene is easy to imagine. Des Batten, ever the helpful friend, comes over to the stern to give him a hand. Now you have two men, Peter, age 69, and Des, age 63, standing together at the very back of a moving 9.8-meter yacht. They are both leaning over, focused intently on the snagged line, their combined weight shifting the boat's center of gravity. Their attention is entirely diverted from the sea around them. At the helm is James Tunstead, the 56-year-old skipper. He's aware of the problem. He might be trying to help by maneuvering the boat, perhaps putting the engine in neutral or trying to circle back to free the line. And this is where the first domino falls. As Peter and Des struggle with the line, the boat is hit by an unexpected swell. It's not a rogue wave, not a monster from the deep, just a slightly larger than average wave that rolls under the stern. With both men already off balance, leaning over the side, the sudden lurch is all it takes. One of them, likely Peter, who is holding the taut fishing rod, loses his footing and tumbles into the water. Instinct kicks in. Des, seeing his friend go overboard, doesn't hesitate. He might have reached out to grab him, losing his own balance in the process. Or he might have intentionally jumped in, a desperate, reflexive act to save his friend who is now struggling in the ocean. In a matter of seconds, two of the three crew members are in the water. The Kaz II, with its engine still idling and its sails still full, begins to drift away from them. Now imagine the scene from James Tunstead's perspective. He's at the helm, and he's just witnessed his brother and his best friend fall into the ocean. The panic must have been instantaneous and overwhelming. His only thought is to get the boat turned around. But the Kaz II is not a speedboat you can just whip around. It's a sailing yacht, under both sail and motor power. The large Genoa sail is out. Turning it around quickly, especially for a single person in a state of extreme panic, is a complex and dangerous maneuver. He has to get to the sails, manage the engine, and steer all at once, all while his loved ones are getting smaller and smaller in the distance. He scrambles from the helm, moving across the deck to try and wrangle the sails for a quick turn. And this is where the second fatal accident occurs. In sailing, one of the most dangerous events is an accidental jibe. This is when the stern of the boat passes through the wind, causing the mainsail and its heavy boom, a thick metal pole, to swing violently and uncontrollably from one side of the boat to the other. It moves with incredible speed and force, enough to knock a person clean off the deck or cause a fatal head injury. Experienced sailors use special ropes called preventers to stop this from happening. There was no preventer rigged on the Kaz II. In his panic, James makes a fatal error. He turns the wheel too hard or misjudges the wind. The boat jibes. The boom swings across the deck with terrifying force. James is in its path. He has no time to react. The impact throws him overboard, possibly injuring him badly in the process. Now all three men are in the water. The Kaz II, their only hope of survival, is sailing away on its own. A ghost ship in the making. The current in this area is strong, pushing north. The boat, guided by the wind and its idling engine, continues on its programmed course. The men left behind would have had no chance. Even if uninjured, the boat would have been out of reach in minutes. They were left to the mercy of the sea. This theory, the snag line and accidental jibe scenario, is terrifyingly plausible. It accounts for almost all the evidence. It explains why the fishing lure was on the deck. It explains how multiple people could have gone overboard in calm conditions without any signs of a struggle. It explains why the boat was in perfect working order, with the engine running and the sails up. It even explains the half-eaten sandwich and the table set for a meal. The accident happened suddenly, interrupting a perfectly normal day. It was a cascade of human error and bad luck. A simple fishing snag spiraling into a triple tragedy. For years, this was the accepted conclusion. It was the story that made a horrifying kind of sense. It closed the book on the Kaz II. But the book was not closed. Because as investigators and independent researchers continued to dig, they analyzed a piece of evidence that had been recovered, but not fully understood. Something that recorded the boat's every move with cold, digital precision. The GPS. And when they finally plotted the Kaz II's final erratic movements on a map, the data told a different story. It painted a picture of the boat's last moments that was far stranger and far more chilling than anyone could have ever imagined. The neat, logical chain of events began to unravel. The GPS data was supposed to be the final word. The one incorruptible witness that could tell us exactly what happened in the hours before the Kaz II became a ghost ship. Investigators plugged it in, expecting to see a clear, logical path. A straight line north, maybe a few tacks against the wind, and then a stop. A point on the map where the tragedy occurred. But that's not what they saw. Not at all. When the track log first appeared on the screen, the initial leg of the journey looked completely normal. On Sunday, April 15th at 6:45 in the morning, the Kaz II slipped out of Airlie Beach. Its digital breadcrumb trail showed it heading north, a steady, unremarkable course. It passed Chute Harbor, then rounded the northern tip of Whitsunday Island. The speed was consistent. The direction was purposeful. This was a boat under the full control of its crew, 3 men heading out for the trip of a lifetime. For hours, the data was textbook. It showed them sailing beautifully, making good time. Everything was perfect. And then, at 1:55 p.m., the first anomaly. The boat made a sudden sharp turn to the west, almost a 90-degree jibe. It was an aggressive maneuver, not unheard of, but odd. Why the sudden change in direction? They were in open water, with no obstacles in sight. It held this new course for a few minutes, then corrected, heading north again. On a map, it looks like a strange little hiccup, a brief detour. At the time, investigators might have chalked it up to any number of things. Maybe they saw a pod of dolphins or wanted a better angle on the wind. It was strange but explainable. But it was the first crack in the foundation of a simple story. The boat continued north for the rest of the afternoon. As evening fell, the data shows the Kaz II slowing, its path becoming a gentle, meandering drift. This was also perfectly normal. They would have dropped anchor for the night in a sheltered bay, just as any sailor would. The GPS shows them stationary until the next morning. Monday, April 16th. This is the day everything went wrong. At 10 a.m., the boat starts moving again. But something is different. The calm, purposeful movement of the previous day is gone. The boat's track is less certain, the speed more variable. It's heading northeast now, out into the Coral Sea, away from the coast. And then at 10:52 a.m., the data points begin to paint a picture of pure chaos. The Kaz II makes another hard turn, this time swinging around almost 180 degrees. Its speed drops dramatically. Then it picks up again, heading south back the way it came. But only for a moment. It then lurches back to the east, then northeast. The track on the map stops looking like a journey and starts looking like a scribble. The boat is turning, slowing, accelerating, turning again. These are not the actions of a vessel sailing to a destination. These are the frantic marks of something going terribly wrong. This is where the investigators had to combine the cold, hard data with the physical evidence on the boat. The sails were up, but one was badly shredded. The fenders were out. A fishing lure was snagged on the boat's port side, its line trailing into the water, dangerously close to the propellers. And the engine was running but in neutral. Suddenly, the GPS data wasn't a scribble anymore. It was a story of a desperate struggle. The most plausible theory, the one that fits every piece of data and every clue, is as mundane as it is terrifying. It starts with a fishing line. Imagine the scene. It's just before 11 a.m. on Monday. The weather is beautiful, just a light breeze. Peter and James Tunstead, the two brothers, are fishing off the back of the boat. Des Batten is at the helm. One of the brothers, let's say Peter, gets his line snagged. Not on a rock but on the boat itself. Maybe the lure gets caught on the rudder, or the line wraps around the propeller. It's an annoying but common problem. Peter, being the eager fisherman, tries to free it. He might be leaning over the stern trying to get a better angle. His brother James sees him struggling and comes over to help. Remember how close the rear deck was to the water? They're both at the very back of the boat, focused on this one small problem, their attention completely diverted. The boat is still moving, propelled by the wind in its sails. It hits a small swell. The deck lurches unexpectedly. Doesn't have to be a big wave. Just a sudden awkward tilt. Peter, off balance, loses his footing and tumbles into the water. James, standing right next to him, instinctively reaches out to grab his brother, but the sudden movement and the weight of his falling brother pulls him in too. Now 2 men are in the water. Des Batten at the helm hears the splash, the shout. He spins around and sees his friends drifting away behind the boat. Panic sets in. He is 69 years old, alone on a 33-foot catamaran that is actively sailing away from his friends. He has to turn it around. Now, this is where the GPS data becomes a gut-wrenching timeline of Des Batten's final moments. That first sharp turn? That's Des spinning the wheel, trying to bring the big boat about. But a catamaran of that size, with its sails full of wind, doesn't turn on a dime. He's fighting the sails, he's fighting the rudders. The boat's erratic movements, the slowing and accelerating, that's him. He's likely running back and forth, from the helm to the sails, trying to depower the boat, trying to gain control, his eyes frantically scanning the waves for his friends. He needs to get the sails down. That's priority number 1. He manages to get the mainsail down and secured. We know this because that's how it was found. But the headsail, the jib, is a different story. It's at the front of the boat. He has to leave the helm to get to it. As he scrambles forward, the boat is now uncontrolled, at the mercy of the wind. The wind catches the big, flapping sail, and in a violent snap, it shreds. The sound would have been like a gunshot. He's alone, the sail is destroyed, and the boat is still not turned around. His friends are getting further and further away. In his desperation, he makes a final, fateful decision. He starts the engines. He thinks correctly that the engines will give him more control than the wind. He gets them running. But in his haste, his panic, maybe as the boat lurches one more time, he makes a mistake. As he moves to engage the propellers, he falls. Perhaps he was reaching for the throttle from the side deck. Perhaps a rope was loose on the deck and he tripped. Perhaps the same swell that took his friends claimed him too. We'll never know the exact mechanism, but the evidence points to one inescapable conclusion. Des Batten went overboard while trying to save the Tunstead brothers. The last piece of the puzzle is the most chilling. The GPS shows the boat's frantic, human-influenced movements ceasing abruptly. After that final series of turns, the boat's path smooths out, stops fighting itself. It simply starts to drift, its course dictated only by the wind and the currents. The engines are running in neutral, going nowhere. The fenders are deployed, a final ghostly testament to a rescue that never happened. The GPS data didn't record a monster wave or a pirate attack. It recorded something far more relatable and therefore far more terrifying. It recorded a series of small mundane accidents that cascaded, one after another, into an irreversible tragedy. It shows how quickly a perfect day on the water can turn into an absolute nightmare. The boat wasn't taken by a rogue force. It was lost to a simple, tragic human error. And for 3 days the Kaz II sailed on, its engines humming, its laptop open, a silent, empty vessel carrying the ghost of its crew's last, desperate moments. The mystery of what happened was solved, But a new, more profound question now hung in the air. Could any of it have been prevented? The tragic, infuriating, and deeply human answer is yes. Almost all of it. The story of the Kaz II isn't a tale of a freak storm or a catastrophic equipment failure. It's a story of small things. A series of seemingly insignificant choices, lapses in judgment, and moments of complacency that aligned in the most devastating way imaginable. It's a story that could happen to almost anyone, and that's what makes it so terrifying. To understand how this dream voyage became a national tragedy, we have to look at what investigators call the error chain. It's a sequence of events where each link is a small mistake, but when connected, they forge an unbreakable chain leading to disaster. The first link was forged before they even left the harbor. It was the life vests. They were on board, neatly stowed in a cupboard. They were in perfect working order, but they weren't being worn. On a calm, sunny day with the coastline in sight, it's an easy choice to make. They're bulky, they're hot, they're uncomfortable. You tell yourself, I'll put it on if the weather turns bad. Or, I'll grab it if I need it. It's a calculation millions of boaters make every single day. But the ocean doesn't wait for you to get ready. Trouble doesn't announce its arrival. For the men of the Kaz II, that simple decision to prioritize comfort over caution was the first and perhaps most critical link in the chain. The second link was the catalyst. A fishing lure. Something so trivial, so mundane. Gets snagged on the rudder. It's an annoyance, nothing more. James, the youngest and likely the most agile, decides to sort it out. His brother Peter, ever the helper, goes to assist. This is where the narrative splits into 1,000 heartbreaking possibilities. Maybe James leaned too far. Maybe a small, unexpected wave rocked the boat just as he lost his footing. Maybe Peter reached out to grab him, and in that split second, the momentum of two men pulled them both over the side. We will never know the exact mechanics, but we know the outcome. Two men were suddenly in the water. This is where Des, the skipper, the experienced one, faces an impossible choice. His friends are in the water. The boat, with its engine idling, is slowly but surely drifting away from them. Panic sets in. Adrenaline floods his system. His first instinct is to save them, not to radio for help, not to cut the engine, but to get them back on board. This is the third link, the instinct to act overriding the procedure to think. He likely scrambled around the deck, trying to maneuver the heavy boat, maybe shouting instructions. He might have tried to throw them a line, but the wind and the current were working against him. The boat, even at a slow idle, would have been moving at about 3 to 4 knots, faster than a person can swim for any sustained period. Every second that passed, the gap between the boat and the men in the water widened. Des realizes he can't turn the boat around fast enough. He needs to get the sails down to stop its forward momentum. He rushes to the mast. The mainsail is still up, catching the wind, acting like a giant engine pushing the Kaz II further and further from his friends. In his frantic haste, he tries to furl the sail, but it gets tangled. Now he's fighting with the boat itself. The very vessel that was supposed to be their chariot to paradise has become an adversary. And in that moment of desperation, as he's wrestling with a jammed sail, watching his friends fall further behind, he makes his final fatal mistake. A small swell, a loss of balance, a single misstep on a moving deck. And suddenly Des is in the water too. Now all three men are watching their beautiful new yacht. Their dreams sail away from them. The ladder at the back is up. The sides of the hull are smooth and high, impossible to climb from the water. They are alone. But they weren't without hope. Not yet. There was still one last chance. A beacon of modern technology designed for this exact scenario. The APIRB, the Emergency Position Indicating Radio Beacon. With the press of a button, it sends a distress signal to a satellite, pinpointing their location for rescuers within minutes. It was their lifeline, and it was sitting on the table inside the cabin just a few feet away. As close as the phone on your nightstand, but as unreachable as the moon. They could see it through the cabin windows as the boat drifted away. A cruel reminder of a safety plan that was fatally flawed. Safety equipment is useless if you can't get to it when you need it most. This is the core of the Kaz II tragedy. It wasn't one single event. It was a cascade. A perfect storm of minor errors. The life vests were stowed. The lure got snagged. The immediate reaction was physical, not procedural. The skipper lost control while trying to help. And the emergency equipment was inaccessible. Remove any single link from that chain and the outcome changes. If they had been wearing their life vests, they could have stayed afloat for hours, even days, conserving energy and waiting for rescue. It would have turned a life-threatening emergency into a serious but survivable inconvenience. If the APERB had been a personal locator beacon, clipped to just one of their belts, a rescue operation would have been launched almost immediately. If they had practiced a man-overboard drill, they would have known the first step is not to jump in, but to throw a life ring, hit the distress button on the radio, and keep eyes on the person in the water. The inquest into their disappearance, led by Queensland coroner Michael Barnes, came to this exact conclusion. He called it a litany of mistakes. He painted a vivid picture of three ordinary men, friends on the adventure of a lifetime, who were let down by a lack of experience and a series of flawed assumptions. Barnes made a powerful recommendation that all yachts be equipped with affordable, water-activated personal safety beacons. He argued that the tragedy of the Kaz II should serve as a stark and permanent warning to the entire boating community. The story became a catalyst for change in Australia. Maritime safety agencies launched massive public awareness campaigns with the simple, haunting message: "You're the skipper, you're responsible." The image of the empty Kaz II was used to drive home the importance of wearing life vests and having accessible safety gear. The deaths of Des Batten, Peter Tunstead, and James Tunstead, while tragic, undoubtedly went on to save other lives by forcing a national conversation about complacency on the water. In the end, the mystery of the ghost yacht wasn't about pirates or foul play or some paranormal event. The truth was far more common and far more chilling. The ghost wasn't on the boat, it was in the water. The ghost was the sum of small human errors. The Kaz II sailed on for 3 days, a perfectly preserved time capsule of the moment disaster struck. The running engine, the open laptop, the half-eaten food, they weren't clues to a mystery, but a silent testament to how quickly a normal day can turn into an irreversible tragedy. The boat was simply doing what it was designed to do: sail. It continued on its course, indifferent to the fate of its crew, a silent, solitary monument to 3 men swallowed by the sea. The ocean is beautiful, but it is not sentimental. It does not forgive carelessness. It does not give second chances. The story of the Kaz II is a heartbreaking reminder that for all our technology and all our confidence, we are only ever guests on its vast, powerful surface. And it demands our constant, unwavering respect. The final lesson from that empty yacht, sailing under the warm Australian sun, is that the most important safety feature on any boat isn't the GPS or the radio. It's the judgment of the people on board.